Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes Deadly Ideologies Edition.
And today we're diving deep into a book that's, well, it's left a pretty dark stain on history.
Yeah.
Guerrilla Warfare by Ernesto Che Guevara.
This isn't just some dusty military manual from the past either.
No.
This is a manifesto that's fueled revolutions, uprisings, and sadly, a lot of bloodshed all around the world.
It's true.
Published in 1961, just after Guevara's victory in the Cuban Revolution,
Yeah.
it's become like a handbook for anyone who is seeking to topple governments by force.
I think one of the things that's fascinating and deeply troubling about this book is how Guevara really romanticizes violence
Yeah,
as a path to social change.
absolutely.
He paints this picture of the guerrilla fighter as this selfless, almost saintly figure
Right.
dedicated to, liberating the masses.
Yeah,
But that image often clashes with the brutal reality of what guerrilla warfare actually looks like,
for sure.
where the lines between, a righteous struggle and outright terrorism can become very blurred.
Totally. So in this deep dive, we're going to kind of dissect Guevara's ideology.
Yeah.
We'll explore his core arguments, the specific tactics that he advocates for,
Yep.
and how his words have actually translated into action, often with some really devastating consequences.
Yes, we'll see how he lays out this blueprint for revolution,
Right.
starting with these small-scale guerrilla actions and escalating all the way to the seizure of state power.
It's quite the plan.
It is.
And we'll examine kind of the moral complexities of a text that explicitly advocates for violence and deception
Yeah.
as tools for political change.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a really, really tough one.
For sure.
So Guevara's book is structured almost like a textbook.
Yeah.
It starts with these general principles, and then it gets into like the nitty-gritty of how to organize, equip, and sustain a guerrilla force.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important to remember that woven through all these tactical details is a very specific and often very dangerous ideology.
Oh, absolutely. He fundamentally believes that revolution doesn't need to wait for the right conditions. It can create those conditions through armed struggle.
Wow.
He argues that even a small, dedicated band of guerrillas can triumph over a larger professional army
Really?
if they have the support of the people.
And that right there is one of the most dangerous ideas in the book, I think.
I think so, too.
It sparked countless uprisings
Yeah.
where people with very limited resources and training were led to believe that they could take on these powerful regimes.
Yeah,
And the results, tragically, have often been catastrophic.
absolutely. And he takes this idea further by arguing that the countryside,
Okay.
not the city, is the ideal battleground for revolution.
Interesting.
He believes that rural populations, particularly peasants, are more likely to be receptive to the revolutionary message
Okay.
and provide support to the guerrilla fighters.
So he's flipping the script on traditional warfare.
Yeah.
He's saying you don't need massive armies or sophisticated weaponry to succeed.
Right.
You need the will of the people,
Yes.
channeled through these small mobile units that can strike quickly and disappear back into the landscape.
Exactly. And that brings us to the heart of Guevara's kind of romanticized vision of the guerrilla fighter.
Okay.
He describes them as these agrarian revolutionaries dedicated to liberating the peasantry from oppression and redistributing land to the people.
So he paints this picture of these incredibly disciplined, almost ascetic individuals.
Yes.
Willing to sacrifice everything for the cause.
Right. He even says they need to be condemned to loneliness.
Wow.
And capable of becoming a cold killing machine.
That's a very stark
That is a stark image.
And it's this image, this almost mythical figure
Yeah.
that has resonated with so many disaffected groups all over the world.
Really?
They see themselves in this warrior poet fighting for justice against overwhelming odds.
Absolutely.
But the reality, as we know, is far more complex.
Right.
Guerrilla warfare often descends into brutality with civilians caught in the crossfire. And the very people that the guerrillas claim to be fighting for becoming victims of the violence.
Absolutely. And Guevara's book, while it is full of these strategic insights,
Yeah.
does provide a blueprint for this kind of escalation.
Okay.
He outlines 3 distinct phases of guerrilla warfare,
Okay.
starting with small-scale hit-and-run tactics,
Okay.
then moving to larger operations, and ultimately culminating in a conventional war aimed at seizing state power.
Wow.
He doesn't shy away from the violence inherent in this process at all.
Yeah.
In fact, he embraces it, arguing that the guerrilla fighter needs to be a Jesuit of warfare, using deception, surprise, and even treachery
Wow.
to achieve their goals.
He's incredibly pragmatic about this.
Oh, he is.
He's arguing that in war, the ends justify the means.
Yeah,
And that's where things get really dangerous.
I agree.
Once you start justifying violence as a path to liberation,
Okay.
where do you draw the line?
It's a line that's been crossed countless times by groups who have been inspired by Guevara's writings,
And sadly.
leading to acts of terrorism, the targeting of civilians,
Right.
and the very oppression that they claim to be fighting against.
And it's important to remember that Guevara wasn't just writing in some theoretical vacuum.
No.
He was drawing on his own experiences in the Cuban Revolution,
Of course.
a conflict that was marked by brutality and bloodshed on both sides.
Absolutely. His book reflects those harsh realities of that war,
Yeah.
and it provides this chillingly detailed guide for anyone seeking to replicate it.
So let's dig into those details.
Okay.
Guevara dedicates a whole chapter to the guerrilla band,
Right.
where he outlines the organizational structure and operational tactics of these small, mobile units.
He emphasizes the importance of choosing the right battleground,
Yeah.
arguing that terrain that offers natural cover and escape routes is essential for a weaker force facing a larger enemy.
Makes sense.
He even provides practical advice on how to assess the terrain,
Wow.
choose strategic locations for encampments, and set up effective defenses.
It really is like a field manual. He's basically writing a field manual for aspiring revolutionaries.
Yeah, he is.
And he's very clear about the need for mobility, speed, and surprise.
Oh, yeah.
He writes, and I quote, "The numerical inferiority of the guerrilla band makes it necessary that attacks always be carried out by surprise. This great advantage is what permits the guerrilla fighter to inflict losses on the enemy without suffering losses."
It's all about hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and sabotage.
Right.
He even goes so far as to say that the guerrilla fighter must be a Jesuit of warfare,
Wow.
using secrecy, treachery, and surprise to achieve their goals.
It's a chillingly pragmatic approach to warfare,
It is.
one that prioritizes effectiveness over any notion of fair play or traditional rules of engagement.
Right.
And it's an approach that's proven incredibly effective, but also incredibly dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. Guevara's emphasis on surprise attacks, ambushes, and sabotage has been adopted by guerrilla movements all over the world,
Yeah.
often with really devastating consequences. And it's important to remember that he's not just talking about targeting military installations or government officials.
Right.
He's advocating for attacks on infrastructure communication networks, even economic targets.
And that's where the line between legitimate resistance and terrorism really starts to blur.
Exactly.
Guevara argues that these attacks are necessary to disrupt the enemy's operations, demoralize their forces, and win over the population.
Yeah.
But the reality is that they often result in civilian casualties and widespread fear.
Absolutely. He's very specific about the need to seize enemy weapons and ammunition,
Oh, wow.
making the enemy your primary source of supply.
Huh.
And he advocates for taking prisoners only when it serves a tactical purpose,
Hmm.
suggesting that those who aren't deemed a threat should be released to sow discord among the enemy ranks.
It's a cold, calculated approach to warfare,
It is.
one that prioritizes the success of the revolution over any humanitarian concerns.
Right.
And it's an approach that's been used to justify countless atrocities in conflicts all over the world.
Now, what's interesting is that alongside this very practical, almost clinical discussion of tactics,
Yeah.
Guevara also spends a lot of time on the practicalities of guerrilla life.
Okay.
How to set up camps, how to find food and supplies, how to maintain discipline and morale among the troops.
Right.
He stresses the importance of self-sufficiency,
Okay.
urging guerrilla fighters to live off the land, avoid becoming dependent on outside support,
Yeah.
and blend in with the local population.
Huh.
He even offers detailed instructions on how to forage for food, purify water, and build shelters.
It's like he's writing a survival guide for revolutionaries.
Yeah, it's like a guerrilla warfare how-to manual.
Exactly.
But there's a certain romanticization of this lifestyle as well.
I can see that.
He sees the guerrilla fighter as a kind of modern-day Robin Hood,
Okay.
living off the land, fighting for the oppressed, and challenging the established order.
Mhm.
He even goes so far as to say that the guerrilla band should be a small army, but also a social force.
Well-
They're not just fighting to overthrow government, they're fighting to build a new society.
And that's where the contradictions in his thinking, I think, become really apparent.
Oh, absolutely.
He's advocating for violence and deception as tools for liberation,
Yeah.
but he's also trying to create a movement that's based on justice, equality, and the will of the people.
Right.
It's a delicate balancing act,
It is.
and one that's often impossible to maintain in the messy reality of war.
Right, that tension between idealism and pragmatism,
Yes.
between the romanticized vision of the guerrilla fighter and the brutal reality of their actions.
Yeah.
runs throughout the book.
It does.
And it's the tension that's played out in countless conflicts around the world,
Gotcha.
often with tragic results.
Absolutely. So as we move on to the next part of our deep dive,
Okay.
we'll explore how Guevara envisions the beginning, development, and end of a guerrilla war.
Sounds good.
We'll see how he maps out a path from those small-scale skirmishes to a full-blown revolution.
Yeah.
And we'll examine the long-term consequences of his ideas.
Right.
For the movements that he inspired and for the world at large.
It's a big topic for sure.
It is a big one.
We'll see what we can unpack.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. Welcome back to our deep dive into guerrilla warfare. Last time we laid out kind of the foundation of Che Guevara's revolutionary ideology.
Right.
So now let's delve a little deeper into his strategic vision
Okay.
for how a guerrilla movement can gain traction, expand, and ultimately triumph.
It's almost like we're moving from, the individual fighter to the organizational level,
Yeah.
seeing how these small bands of rebels can actually grow into a force capable of challenging an entire state.
That's exactly it. Guevara lays out this blueprint for this evolution in his chapter on the beginning, development, and end of a guerrilla war. He envisions a process of gradual escalation, starting with small disruptive actions that are designed to weaken the enemy and build support among the populace.
He emphasizes that in those early stages, the guerrilla band needs to be incredibly mobile,
Right.
striking quickly, and disappearing back into the landscape before the enemy can respond effectively.
Absolutely. It's all about avoiding decisive engagements and gradually wearing down the opponent.
And he stresses the importance of choosing targets carefully.
Oh.
He argues that attacking infrastructure, like bridges, railroads, and communication lines,
Yep.
can disrupt the enemy's operations and sow chaos,
Right.
creating a sense that the government is losing control.
Absolutely. He even suggests targeting economic assets like plantations or mines
Okay.
to undermine the enemy's financial base and disrupt the flow of resources.
So it's a strategy that's designed to create a climate of instability
Yeah,
and demonstrate the guerrilla's growing power.
exactly. And as the movement gains momentum, Guevara envisions this shift to larger scale operations,
Yeah.
establishing semi-permanent bases, conducting ambushes on enemy patrols, even launching raids on towns and military outposts.
He argues that this escalation is necessary to maintain the initiative, keep the enemy off balance, and really demonstrate to the population that the revolution is a viable force for change.
Yeah, he's very clear that the ultimate goal of this process is to transition from a guerrilla force to a conventional army,
Okay?
capable of engaging the enemy in open battle and seizing control of the state.
It's a bold vision,
It is.
and one that's fraught with risks. I mean, many guerrilla movements have faltered at this stage,
They have.
either because they couldn't adapt to conventional warfare or because they lost the support of the people as the violence escalated.
Guevara acknowledges these challenges,
Okay.
but he remains optimistic that with careful planning, strong leadership, and the unwavering support of the masses, the revolution can ultimately triumph.
But it's important to note that his optimism is often based on a set of assumptions
Yeah.
that have proven to be problematic in real-world conflicts.
Yeah, like what?
Well, he assumes that the population will remain united behind the revolution, even as the fighting intensifies and the cost of war mounts.
Yeah, that's a big assumption.
He also assumes that the enemy will crumble under pressure,
Okay.
that they'll be demoralized by the guerrillas' successes and eventually lose the will to fight.
Yeah.
And he really downplays the potential for external intervention.
Right.
The possibility that other countries might come to the aid of the regime that the guerrillas are trying to overthrow.
Right, and all of these assumptions have been proven wrong time and again in conflicts around the world.
They have.
Revolutions often descend into civil wars,
Yeah.
with different factions fighting for control.
Well, of course.
Enemies can prove to be far more resilient than anticipated,
Yeah.
willing to use brutal tactics to maintain power.
Right. And external intervention can dramatically alter the course of a conflict,
Absolutely.
prolonging the violence and exacerbating the suffering.
It's a reminder that Guevara's blueprint, while strategically insightful,
Yeah.
is not a guarantee of success.
For sure.
And even when revolutions do succeed,
Right.
they often come at a tremendous cost in terms of human life and social upheaval.
Absolutely. Now, Guevara doesn't just focus on military strategy.
No.
He dedicates a significant portion of the book to the organizational aspects of guerrilla warfare,
Okay.
recognizing that a successful movement needs more than just fighters and weapons.
He stresses the importance of establishing a parallel structure,
Okay.
what he calls civil organization, operating alongside the guerrilla forces.
So this structure is responsible for mobilizing the population,
Right.
providing logistical support to the guerrillas, disseminating propaganda,
Yeah.
and even administering justice in areas under rebel control.
He basically envisions this shadow government
Wow.
gradually taking over the functions of the state as the revolution progresses.
It's an ambitious and complex undertaking.
It is.
And one that requires careful coordination and a deep understanding of local conditions.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
He also emphasizes the importance of winning over the population,
Right.
not just through force of arms, but
Okay.
through persuasion and demonstrating a commitment to their well-being.
He argues that providing basic services like healthcare and education, even in the midst of war, is crucial for building trust.
Yeah.
And demonstrating that the revolution is truly fighting for the people.
Absolutely. And he recognizes the power of propaganda.
Right.
He advocates for establishing clandestine printing presses, setting up underground radio stations, and spreading the revolutionary message through songs, poems, even theatrical performances.
It's all about shaping the narrative,
Right.
controlling the flow of information,
Yeah.
and countering the enemy's propaganda with their own compelling vision for the future.
Exactly. And Guevara was a master of this himself.
Yeah.
He understood the power of symbols, images, and words to inspire, motivate, and mobilize people. And his own writings, with their blend of revolutionary fervor and romanticized violence,
Yeah.
have proven to be incredibly potent propaganda tools for movements all over the world.
Now, alongside this focus on winning hearts and minds,
Okay.
Guevara also addresses the more practical challenges of sustaining a guerrilla force. How to acquire weapons, food, and other supplies.
Right. He advocates for a mix of tactics,
Okay.
including raiding enemy stockpiles, confiscating goods from those who support the regime,
All right.
establishing clandestine supply lines, and even soliciting donations from sympathetic individuals and businesses.
He even suggests issuing bonds of hope,
Wow.
essentially promissory notes acknowledging debts incurred by the revolution, as a way of formalizing the movement's financial obligations and demonstrating a commitment to accountability.
It's an interesting blend of pragmatism and idealism.
It is.
He's willing to use force or coercion when necessary,
Yeah.
but he also tries to create a sense of legitimacy and transparency within the movement.
And he stresses the importance of self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
He argues that guerrillas should learn to live off the land scavenged for supplies and improvise whenever possible,
Right.
reducing their dependence on external support.
He even goes into detail about establishing clandestine workshops to repair weapons,
Really?
manufacture ammunition, even produce basic medical supplies.
Wow.
He's essentially advocating for creating a self-sustaining, revolutionary infrastructure capable of operating even in the face of enemy blockades or supply shortages.
It's a testament to his pragmatism and his understanding of the logistical challenges of waging a protracted guerrilla war.
Absolutely. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of Guevara's ideology is his advocacy for sabotage.
Okay.
He sees it as this crucial tool for weakening the enemy, disrupting their operations, and sowing chaos.
He's very specific about the types of targets he considers legitimate,
Okay.
focusing on infrastructure, communication networks, and economic assets.
Right.
He argues that attacking these targets can cripple the enemy's ability to function and demonstrate the revolution's growing power.
Exactly. He even provides detailed instructions on how to carry out such attacks,
Wow.
using explosives, incendiaries, and other methods.
But this is where the line between justified resistance and indiscriminate terrorism
Yeah.
becomes incredibly blurry. Guevara tries to draw a distinction by arguing that sabotage should only target military or economic assets, not civilians.
Right. But the reality is that such distinctions are often difficult, if not impossible, to maintain in the heat of battle.
Of course.
And even when sabotage is carefully targeted, the consequences can be devastating for civilian populations.
Absolutely. The destruction of infrastructure can disrupt essential services like electricity, water, transportation, causing widespread hardship.
Of course.
And attacks on economic targets can lead to job losses, economic instability, even famine.
Guevara acknowledges these risks, but he seems to view them as an acceptable cost of revolution.
Wow.
He believes that the ends justify the means, that violence and disruption are necessary to break the grip of the oppressor and create a more just society.
It's a chillingly pragmatic approach.
It is.
And one that's been used to justify countless acts of violence and brutality in the name of revolution.
And it's important to remember that Guevara's writings have been incredibly influential,
They have.
inspiring movements around the world to adopt his tactics and embrace his ideology.
Yeah, for the jungles of Vietnam to the mountains of Afghanistan. His words have echoed in the minds of revolutionaries and fueled conflicts that have claimed millions of lives.
It's a heavy legacy.
It is.
And the legacy of his ideas, both the idealism and the brutality,
Right.
continues to shape our world today.
Welcome back to our deep dive into guerrilla warfare. We've explored the tactics, the organization, even the chilling pragmatism of Che Guevara's approach to revolution. But there's one crucial element I think we haven't fully addressed yet.
And that's the human element. The individuals who actually make up these guerrilla bands.
Right.
The sacrifices that they make, the motivations that drive them to risk everything for a cause.
Guevara dedicates a whole chapter to the guerrilla fighter.
Right.
And in it, he paints a very vivid portrait of the ideal revolutionary.
Okay.
Disciplined, selfless, utterly dedicated to the struggle.
He writes about the need for these fighters to be condemned to loneliness, cut off from their families and their former lives,
Right.
fully immersed in the revolution. He even describes them as ascetics,
Okay.
renouncing material possessions and embracing a life of hardship and danger.
It's an almost romanticized image.
Yeah.
This warrior poet figure
Yeah.
willing to die for the cause.
And it's an image that's proven incredibly seductive for generations of young people
Yeah.
who are disaffected with the status quo,
Right.
seeking a sense of purpose and belonging.
Absolutely.
Mm.
But it's important to remember that this romanticized image
Yeah.
often clashes with the brutal reality of what guerrilla warfare actually is.
Of course.
These fighters are often thrust into situations where they have to make life or death decisions,
Right.
where they witness unspeakable violence, where they're forced to kill or be killed.
And the psychological toll of this kind of existence can be immense.
It has to be.
Guevara acknowledges this, writing about
Yeah.
the need for discipline, mental toughness, and the ability to compartmentalize your emotions.
He even describes a guerrilla fighter as a cold killing machine,
Yeah.
capable of detaching themselves from the act of taking a human life.
It's a chilling image.
It is.
And one that raises some profound ethical questions, I think, about the nature of war and the dehumanizing effects of violence.
And it's important to consider the impact not just on the fighters themselves,
Yeah.
but on the communities that they operate within.
Right.
Guerrilla warfare often blurs the lines between combatants and civilians,
Absolutely.
with entire populations caught in the crossfire.
Guevara talks about the importance of winning the support of the people,
Okay.
of relying on them for food, shelter, and intelligence.
Right.
But he also acknowledges that sometimes coercion is necessary.
Wow.
That those who refuse to support the revolution may need to be punished or even eliminated.
And that's where things get really dangerous.
Absolutely.
Once you start justifying violence against those who don't share your ideology,
Right.
you open the door to all sorts of abuses.
Of course, and we've seen this play out time and again in conflicts around the world,
Yeah.
with guerrilla movements turning on their own people,
Right.
resorting to terror and intimidation to maintain control.
Absolutely. It's a dark side of revolution that Guevara doesn't fully address in this book.
No, he focuses on the idealism, the heroism, the romanticized struggle against oppression,
Yeah.
but he glosses over the messy, brutal reality
For sure.
of what happens when ideology collides with the complexities of human nature.
Now, alongside this discussion of the individual guerrilla fighter,
Mhm.
Guevara also dedicates a whole section to the role of women in the revolution.
Right, and it's here that his writing reveals some of the limitations of his own worldview.
Okay.
While he acknowledges the courage and capabilities of women,
Right.
praising their contributions to the struggle,
Okay.
he ultimately sees their primary roles as being supportive of the male-dominated fighting force.
He talks about women working in medical units, running schools and hospitals,
Right.
providing logistical support, even engaging in combat when necessary.
Yeah.
But he doesn't envision them as equals on the battlefield or as leaders within the movement.
It's a reflection of the patriarchal society he came from.
Yeah.
And it underscores the fact that even revolutionary movements
Right.
can be shaped by the prejudices and limitations of their time.
Absolutely. Now, in the final chapters of the book,
Okay.
Guevara shifts his focus to the challenges of maintaining power once the revolution has succeeded.
Right. He recognizes that the struggle doesn't end with the overthrow of the old regime.
He says, in fact, that the real work begins after the victory,
Yeah.
as the new government faces this daunting task of rebuilding society,
Right.
establishing new institutions, and defending themselves against counter-revolutionary forces.
He dedicates 2 appendices to these challenges.
Okay.
One focused on the transition from a guerrilla force to a regular army,
Sure.
and the other on the defense of the revolution once it's been achieved.
In these sections, Guevara's pragmatism and his authoritarian tendencies.
really come to the forefront.
Absolutely. He stresses the need for discipline, order, and a strong central authority
Okay.
to prevent the revolution from descending into chaos.
He advocates for maintaining a state of permanent vigilance,
Right.
always prepared for internal or external threats.
Mm.
And he justifies the use of force to suppress opposition and maintain control. It's a vision of revolution that's far removed from the romanticized ideal of popular liberation.
He's essentially advocating for a one-party state,
Right?
where dissent is stifled and the revolution becomes its own form of oppression.
Yeah, and this is a pattern we've seen repeated time and again in revolutions throughout history.
Absolutely. The very people who fought for freedom often become the oppressors once they gain power.
Now, in the book's epilogue, Guevara takes a step back from the practicalities of revolution
Okay.
to offer a broader reflection on the Cuban experience and its global significance.
He's clearly very proud of what the revolution has achieved,
Yeah.
touting its social and economic reforms as a model for other countries.
Struggling against imperialism and exploitation.
He describes the land redistribution program,
Right.
the nationalization of industries,
Right.
the efforts to improve healthcare and education as proof that a socialist revolution can create a more just and equitable society.
But he also acknowledges the challenges facing Cuba,
Okay, like what?
particularly the hostility of the United States
Yeah.
and the threat of economic and military intervention.
He predicts that the U.S. will try to undermine or even overthrow the revolutionary government.
Yeah.
And he calls on the Cuban people to be prepared to defend their hard-won gains.
His analysis is chillingly prescient.
It is.
Given the decades of U.S. sanctions, covert operations, and attempts to isolate Cuba that followed the revolution.
And it highlights the precariousness of revolutionary change.
Absolutely.
The constant threat of backlash from those who benefit from the old order.
Guevara ends the book with this stirring declaration, proclaiming that Cuba has shown the way of the armed popular fight for liberation.
It's a powerful statement.
It is.
And one that's resonated with countless people all over the world.
But it's also a statement that needs to be read with a critical eye,
Right.
considering the full context of Guevara's ideology, the violence it unleashed, and the authoritarian regimes it inspired.
So as we conclude our deep dive into guerrilla warfare,
Okay.
it's important to reflect on the complex legacy of this book and its author.
I agree Guevara was a complex figure,
He was?
a man driven by idealism and a thirst for justice,
Yeah.
but also capable of ruthlessness and brutality.
And his writings offer a glimpse into the seductive power of revolutionary ideology,
Yes.
but also a warning about the dangers of embracing violence as a path to social change.
His book has inspired countless people to fight for a better world,
It has.
but it's also provided a blueprint for repression and authoritarianism.
And the challenge for us as we grapple with this ongoing struggle for justice and equality
Yeah.
is to learn from both the triumphs and the failures of those who came before us.
It's about finding ways to create meaningful change without resorting to the tactics that Guevara so readily embraced.
Yeah, it's about building movements that are truly democratic, inclusive, and accountable to the people they claim to represent.
And it's about recognizing that the path to a just and equitable society is long and complex,
It is.
and that there are no easy answers or quick fixes.
Guerrilla warfare offers a glimpse into one man's vision for revolution.
It does.
But it's up to us to write the next chapter in the ongoing struggle for human liberation.
That's a good way to put it.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive
It's been a pleasure.
into one of the most influential and controversial books of the 20th century. We hope it's given you a deeper understanding of the complexities of revolution, the allure and the dangers of Guevara's ideology, and the ongoing challenges we face in building a more just and equitable world.